Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Stephen Bob. I'm happy to welcome you to Elmhurst University's annual Abraham Joshua Heschel Lecture. This lecture is one of a series of religious lectures that we host at the university each year. This Jewish lecture is named in memory of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. We chose to name it for Dr. Heschel, partly because of his long-term and strong relationship with Reinhold Niebuhr, a very important person in the history of the university, and also because Rabbi Heschel was a major figure in religious life of our country. He was a major Jewish religious thinker, and he was a major religious actor. Dr. Heschel famously said, "I pray with my feet." I am pleased now to introduce our chaplain, Reverend Scott Matheny, who will introduce this evening's speaker.
Thank you, Rabbi Bob. It is a joy to have you all here, and we have an amazing list of history of distinguished people that have spoken for this Heschel lecture. And in that line, started in 1998, 99, we have been able to bring to bear the fruits of scholarship, engagement in society, and the process of thinking through how we understand ourselves. Tonight's guest is in that long history. He's a dear friend, both personally of me, but also for many of us that are going to be on this talk tonight. For a number of places, we can start with an introduction with Rabbi Michael Paley, but for us here, I'm anxious for you to know that he was our rabbi at Dartmouth College and had a distinguished history as a part of Dartmouth's legacy. We actually have an alum of Elmhurst who was the chaplain at Dartmouth, who started the Hillel Foundation at Dartmouth. In that line, Michael then came to New York City and Columbia University to be the first university chaplain in the history of the United States who was not a Christian. Rabbi Paley came to Columbia University, was voted to be the chaplain of the university, and came into being. And when you look at that length of stay, working with Israel-Palestine questions, working across the board on service and justice issues, Harlem, you can go down a long list of amazing accomplishments just in that tenure alone. Actually, last night, I started thinking about the great line of Hillel, the first century rabbi, who writes, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, who am I? If not now, when?" Those three questions have fueled and undergird Rabbi Michael Paley's life, the academy, out into the broader society, working with the Federation as an academic teacher, where he now has gone in retirement, but not really, off to Budapest. And while we have him here, he is bringing to the table his understanding of both Heschel and the questions that I've been posing to a lot of the students around here. How do you make purpose and meaning in your life? Using three questions of Hillel and using the example of Heschel. And in that sense, we are honored to have Rabbi Michael Paley join us for this 40-minute conversation that will lead to questions that you can type in, and Rabbi Bob and I will help bring that back and forth. But will you all join me in waving your hands, doing whatever you can to give a warm Elmhurst welcome to Rabbi Michael Paley, our Heschel lecture for this year. Welcome, Rabbi Michael. Woo!
Well, first of all, I'm just so honored and pleased to be here, and I just can't tell you how much I miss Scott Matheny going, woo! In fact, I think one of the things that is a special joy of my life and this whole world is calling Scott Matheny and listening to his answering machine in different ways and feeling uplifted just by that alone, you know. And so my old friend Scott, we've been at it for a while, the two of us. I just couldn't be more honored to be here and doing the Heschel lecture at Elmhurst University. So I want to thank Scott for that, and I want to thank Rabbi Bob for really initiating this. And I suppose I want to thank Rabbi Bob for calling it the Heschel Lecture. It gave me a chance a couple of months ago to, when Scott and I talked about this, to start to read Heschel. And so the number one thing is that I don't think there's anything in human literature that's more uplifting than reading Heschel. He was just such a wonderful writer and poet. And just not to put too fine a point on it, he did it in Yiddish, Hebrew, German, classical German, and English, and it comes out perfect in all of the languages. So it was really something extraordinary. When I began to put my books together to read about Heschel, I realized that I have more books, more shelf space devoted to books by Heschel than any other person in my library. And I don't think I'd really been aware of that. And so I kind of want to think of that as that I just kind of have him at my shoulder in my life. And he's really, I suppose, one of the great influences on me. I wanted him to be a much bigger influence. I applied to be his graduate student in 1972 as I was graduating college, and I was accepted to be his graduate student. Sad to say, in December of 1972, he died, and unexpectedly, I think. I was shocked by it. And so I didn't get to do that, and it really deflected my life. I do want to tell you two short Heschel stories, but I want to put them in the context of what of why I think this is an auspicious day. You know, this is the eve of Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah is Holocaust Memorial Day, Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's particularly called the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust and victims, survivors, and heroes. Gevurah. It's the day of strength and partisans. My father-in-law was a partisan. That meant he lost his entire family. They were all put in a train and taken to Auschwitz and never seen again. But he was a 14-year-old and went into the forest and fought for 2.5 years, living. If you've ever seen the movie Defiance, it's shot in that forest, the Ruzhana forest. He was from Ruzhana. So I have lived the last 40 years of my life, or slightly more, with a father-in-law who was a survivor, and we'll talk to you about it almost every occasion. Even when it's inconvenient, even when you're not ready for it, even when you don't think it's really what's going on, I hear him and I hold him in my heart now. He's 96. For some reason, Holocaust survivors lived a long time. There's a theory that they use all sorts of redundant systems in their bodies, and so that they really do live a long time. But and he's 96, and in this last year, he's revisited his youth in a shocking and powerful way. And so I think about that. You know, the Shoah, the Holocaust, is an event of such proportions that it just challenges everything we know, everything we think. There's nobody, I think, that can have real confidence in any piece of human wisdom or even our interpretation of divine wisdom in the face of the Holocaust. You can't kill 1.5 million children. You can't have one of the great societies of the world, Germany. You could see it during the Weimar Republic, just before the Nazis came, and have great honor and respect for it, and then see that society go and kill. And all the way through Europe. I live in Budapest. We know well how many people helped Jews, but really how many people did not, and who were really part of that. So what are we to think? How are we supposed to address the issues? Scott has beautifully put together. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? These are all based on some sense of self-truth and truth in the world. And I have to say, on this particular night in the year, truth is broken. Mine, yours, everybody's. That's how I understand this moment in the year, and I want to put that in some context. I want to ask the question. So not if, now, when. I kind of want to ask the other question, which is so now what? Once our truths are broken, once they turn to dust, we have to recreate them. How do we go about doing that? How do we find out the mission of our lives? How do we live in this world in a way that is both sacred, holy, and giving to our friends? And so I called this talk Time for a New Narrative. And this holiday tonight, if we were in Israel about an hour ago, there would be a siren that goes off for 2 minutes, and everyone stops, no matter where they are. They get out of their cars, they stop shopping in the supermarket, they stand up in their bedroom alone, they stop eating with their kids. And we just spend 2 minutes listening to that siren, and then again in the morning, and ask ourselves the question, so now what? How does one put the world together again, the narrative of Judaism, the narrative of humanity, after doing that? All right, a couple of stories about Heschel, which I think are relevant from the beginning, and then I'll talk about him in the context of my talk. I was 17 years old. It was the Vietnam War. I was highly engaged for a 17-year-old in anti-war activities. There was a induction center in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where they were inducting draftees into the Army, and there was a demonstration in front of the draft buses, and I decided to go to it. I was 17, I was active, that was the right thing to do. And so we all laid down in front of draft buses, people were arrested, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw about 10 or 12 people that were wearing prayer shawls, taluses, which we really only see in the synagogue. And they had tefillin on. They had the leather straps that religious Jews wear in the morning to remind themselves of the strong hand of God took us out of Egypt, and that we're bound to God. And so I was surprised by this. I'd never seen anything like that outside, and certainly not at a draft resistance. So I went over and I said, well, this is interesting. I don't know who you people are. And they said, well, we are protesting because it comes out of our Jewish narrative that we have to be activists. We weren't activists before, we have to be activists now, and we have to take this seriously. We have to do, our prayer demands that we stand in front of these draft buses. And I thought, well, that was amazing. I love those people, and those people became my closest friends in my whole life. And one of those people standing there that day was Abraham Joshua Heschel. And so from the very beginning, I felt inspired by him. Just a few years later, I had read his magnificent work called God in Search of Man, right? It's an interesting title, not Man in Search of God, but God in Search of Man. God is looking at us and watching us and challenging us to be better humans, to go beyond ourselves, to care about people who are not ourselves. If I'm only for myself, who am I? But if I'm only for myself, who really am I? I have to go beyond myself. I'll get back to that in a bit. So God in Search of Man is an important book, and I decided to go to graduate school at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I was very nervous. I had to have my interview, so I walked into the elevator at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and there is a man in the elevator. He kind of looks like this. And to me, he looked like God. I don't know what God looks like exactly. I know that we're all made in the image of God, but he seemed to be a little more in the image of God than the rest of us. And he put his hand out like this, Heschel. Well, I didn't know if the interview had started yet. So I said, God in Search of Man, thinking that it was a question. Say who Heschel is. God in Search of Man. That seemed like it was a smart thing to say. And he said, my dear boy, this is not a quiz. I'm Heschel. So I wanted to die right there, walk out of the elevator. We had to go up the hallway, and then later I sat with him for my interview in front of a big stack of yellow loose leaf paper with poems, sometimes only one word on a page, and that was for me. And I wanted to be his graduate student, and sad to say, in that December he after I saw him one more time at a demonstration when the Berrigans, anti-war priests, came out of jail. He was there, and I think he actually maybe had caught a cold at that time, and he died. So that's my Heschel story. I do want to return to him in a bit, but I want to back up for a second. It is my understanding of the world, basically, that we are creatures of narrative. That, like Elie Wiesel once said, I'm a teller of tales, I'm a teller of stories, and that the stories that we carry around with us are the significant stories of our lives. And they tell us who we are. Just Some of us can remember aphorisms like Scott said about Hillel, but most of us are connected moment to moment. And the stories that we get are the stories that we play out. And you can see the way that stories are told in cultures, and it has a lot to do with the culture. I live in Budapest now, and you can easily see that the manipulation of everything that is in that city is done so that the story gets told the way the government wants to tell the story. Statues are moved, holidays are declared, holidays are eliminated, all sorts of things like that, so that the people of Hungary begin to feel that they are part of a master story, a story that really explains their life in one way or another. America is not different than that. We know a lot about how America puts together the tales that we are part of, and that the tales that we are part of are dramatic. You know, they go to the way America was put together. You know, we can say what the holidays are. Thanksgiving. We're grateful that we're here, right? We were persecuted where we came from, and now we're here. This is a significant part. I don't know if the second Thanksgiving dinner in 1622 was so good, but the first one with the Wampanoag Indians and the Patuxet Indians was very cordial. And in 1863, when Abraham Lincoln wanted to, in the middle of the Civil War, wanted to make sure that people thought that it was important to get along with each other, he made the holiday of Thanksgiving, it had been celebrated for many years unofficially, into a national holiday. And so that's part of our story. You know, we're grateful to be here. This is a country that we came to. Not everybody. It's aspirational. Some people didn't come here on purpose. Some people were enslaved. Some people were destroyed. It wasn't always fair. I'm not rosy. I'm just saying that the story that we tell ourselves is that Thanksgiving is a holiday of gratitude. When we sit around the table, we express gratitude. Independence Day. We're a democracy. We're a free country. We're not a perfect democracy. We weren't always a perfect democracy. It's also aspirational. But from that narrative, we are grateful to be here and we are free. We can see the other pieces of it. President's Day. We don't have a king. We elect our government, and they, well, until recently, peacefully depart at the end of their term, and a new government comes in. Memorial Day. We fought hard for this privilege of being a democracy, and so we honor the people that lost their lives. Veterans Day, we're the ones that are no longer alive and the ones that are alive. And Labor Day. If you work hard, you can make it in America. So we are grateful to be part of the country. We fought hard for the privilege. We are a democracy and free. If you work hard, you can make it here. Martin Luther King's birthday, no matter who you are, we believe that if you work hard, you should be able to make it in America. That is in some ways the American dream. I am, not jaded about these things, and I always enjoyed the American holidays. I know that a lot of them turned into car sales on a holiday weekend. But listen, if you go to the immigrant communities around the country and they're trying to get the new narrative of where they live, this is the narrative that they find out. And I feel it's not only the story that we tell about ourselves as Americans, but it's a challenge to who we might be. This is an old piece of thinking. We teach our narratives. We don't just teach them in schools. We teach them in holidays. We teach them with statues and monuments. We teach them with theater. We teach them with election campaigns. We do all sorts of things to teach our narrative. And that is the American narrative. We might not think that it's the right narrative, but I believe that that is what we want. Well, Judaism also has a narrative structure. In fact, I think it has three. One from the time of the Bible, one from the time of the rabbis, and one from the modern period. Tonight, as I said in the beginning, is Yom HaShoah, and next week there are two other Jewish holidays. We haven't had any new holidays in Judaism for 2,000 years. And so I want to kind of reflect about those holidays and whether they're the right ones or not, how they work and how they feel. Sound good? I have to tell you, it's daunting to talk to you and not see any of your faces. I don't know if, like, maybe if I crack a joke, will you laugh? I won't know. You know, you'll send me a little message or wave. I don't, even if you wave, I won't see you. In fact, I can only see Rabbi Bob and Scott. So, which were lovely people to look at. So we'll go from there. I first began to think about this. I think we all first began to think about this with the modern philosopher whose name is Franz Rosenzweig. Franz Rosenzweig was born in 1886. I think maybe I can get Chris to put up the first picture of him. We'll see if that goes. There he is. He was a tall, delightful bon vivant. He was born in 1886 to a wealthy businessman's father. They owned a series of department stores called Rosenzweig's. And he was a medical student in the beginning, kind of a child prodigy. Many people think a real true genius. He then, as he got through his studies, decided to leave medical study and start to study philosophy. And he wrote his doctoral dissertation on the work of Hegel and the state. Rosenzweig, in around 1912, as a relatively young man, began to have religious urges. And his religious urges he noticed were quite out of sync with the community, particularly the Jewish community. At that time in Germany, the appropriate way of being Jewish in the turn of into the 20th century was to be assimilated. That didn't mean not Jewish. What that meant was that you would behave like a German, you would think like a German, you would behave in the civic way as a German, and you were a Jew of the German nationality. And this was quite different than Jews had been in the past. And Rosenzweig and his whole family certainly believed in this. But when Rosenzweig is in around 1912 begins to say, I see the society that I live in as a spiritless and overly rational and a society that has lost its sense of magic, understanding, and belief. And I'll answer the question if you put the question up. I can't see. I can only see that there was a good question. What Rosenzweig says about that is he says, look, we are all part of this post-Hegelian, philosophically driven reductionist society. And the society is telling us to believe in German idealism. And German idealism in 1912, whether it was authentic to Hegel or not, basically said that the self was the most significant actor in the society. So everyone had to really take care of themselves, think about themselves. And if they did things in their own self-interest, this would create a society that was well-ordered, productive, and meaningful for the people. Meaningful in the sense of the self. Rosenzweig says, this is not really meaningful. This is meaningful about the individual, but it's not meaningful about the collective. It's not even meaningful about some sense of transcendence. It's not even meaningful above where we really are in our own lives. I want to be part of something greater. He looks into the Judaism of his life, which is an assimilated Judaism, and he says, no, I can't see it there, right? And so in 1912, he decides to study for a year of Judaism, and then on the encouragement of his cousin Hans Ehrenberg and his friend, the philosopher Eugen Rosh-Sakyusi, he says, I'm going to become a Christian. Because Christianity is a live religion, and Judaism is a dead religion. So he studies all year long, and he decides that the great moment for him will be Yom Kippur. He'll go to Yom Kippur services in Frankfurt with his family. He'll pray during Yom Kippur, and the day after Yom Kippur, he'll become a Christian. Well, he goes to his mother, and he says to his mother, listen, I want to become a Christian. Is that okay? And she says, this is not okay. This is an embarrassment to our family. We're not that religious. We're not religious at all. But we think we're part of the Jewish community, and we don't want you to become a Christian. So if you're going to come for Yom Kippur, don't come to our synagogue. So he says, okay, I won't do that, but I'll go to Berlin. He goes to Berlin. He goes to the Orienberger Strasse synagogue, probably, we're not completely sure. And he gets there on time, but they say, no, you can't come, no ticket. You didn't reserve your space in advance. And so you have to go to the little prayer halls that the Jews from the East, Poland and Ukraine and Russia are going to, because they're for one reason or another in Berlin. So he goes into the service and he sees for the first time in his life people actually praying, and they're praying for their life, and they're not praying only about themselves. They're praying with a certain sense of ecstasy, a certain sense of transformed consciousness, with a certain sense of being, and they're praying to God, not the God within, the God without, the God above, the God of old in some ways, the God of old. And he sees them transform. He sees them actually arguing for their life, arguing for their society, arguing for their family. In this sense of social engagement, this sense of actual confrontation with God, actual encountering God, was something he had never seen in the now stripped down, assimilated Judaism that he came. And he began to think, and he comes out of this service in 1913, and he says to his cousin Ehrenberg, it is not necessary for me to become a Christian. Not that Christianity wouldn't work, but that Judaism, as a response to the rational and flat society that he lived in, would also work. And since he was Jewish, he could be Jewish. This is the beginning of an interreligious approach that was very new and almost unique. I'm not telling you that Judaism is better than Christianity or Christianity is better than Judaism. I'm saying both work. They're both a path forward, and they're both a path forward to a narrative. And then he said, what is my narrative? How am I going to understand the narrative that's going to form me so that I don't shrink back into my assimilated Jewish life? Let's have the next slide now. He writes a book called The Star of Redemption. This is the star right in front of you, in which he says, here's the narrative. There are two triads that are at work in the world. We always reduce the world to one or of the three. So the mystic would often say the whole world is God. We're not really people, and the world, nature is not really nature. Actually, everything is God. The human part and the natural part are illusory. Everything can be reduced to God. And the materialist, of course, said also that nature is everything, right? Human beings are just animals. We're animals with certain abilities, but we're animals all the same. And therefore, nature, the universe is everything. And some people said Geist, spirit, ideas, thought, that's everything. That was the nature of the day in Germany for young Rosenzweig. And everything. God is just a human thought, and even the sense of nature is a part of a human thought. Rosenzweig says, no. I don't want to see God as part of me. I want to see God and me, God and humanity, God and nature, nature and humanity. I want to put the and back in. I want to have a relationship. Most philosophy determines the nature of a thing. Rosenzweig said, I want to do anti-philosophy, and that anti-philosophy will be to determine the nature of our relationship. Relationships are everything. I'm sure that my friend Scott tells you that relationships are the crucial thing. Martin Buber will later say, all life is meeting. We have to meet each other. And Rosenzweig comes up with a scheme. He says, between God and the universe, the language is creation. God creates the universe with the laws of creation, the laws of nature. And that relationship, creation, is between God and the universe. Human beings are not creators, and we are the created. In that way, we're part of nature. We respond to the laws of nature. Between God and human beings, revelation. When you hear from God, or when you're trying to say something to God because you encounter God, that encounter between God and humanity is called revelation. And our relationship to nature is redemptive. We have to put something in nature. We have to be careful about it. We have to do our part to manage it and not exploit it, not overuse it. We all know about that now. When Rosenzweig was writing, there was no ecological disaster that he could see. There was no climate change that he could feel. We all now know that the relationships between human beings and the world is crucial. The universe will be fine, by the way, without us. You know, I once said to a paleontologist, Stephen Jay Gould, I said, well, we could destroy the world. He said, oh, no, the world will be fine. It'll be us that's destroyed. But the world, no problem with that. They'll come right back. Just, a million years or whatever, the ozone layer will be back, the seas will be pure, we'll just be gone. It's a parochial concern. When Rosenzweig decides that this is the basic structure of the Jewish thought, he begins to see it everywhere. And he even sees it in the calendar. Let's have the next slide. This is a little slide about the Jewish calendar. So I'm just going to talk about this for a few minutes. The first, he says there are two kinds of holidays. One is holidays of rest. The Sabbath, as you can see inside the circle there, is the Sabbath. It's in every single week. And that will be a recollection of the non-human creation, the paradise of Eden, not Jewish, just the paradise. But we'll also tell our narrative, we'll tell our story. So the first story that we get is the story of Passover. So if you look at around 6:30 if you saw this as a clock, you would see that Passover is part of the first moment of the narrative. Passover, even though we think about it as the liberation, even the delivery, what Rosenzweig sees it as is the creation. Jews, the people of Israel and the Jewish people are created on Passover. It is the one moment of the year that if we don't take part in it, we feel like we're not part of the community. We can hardly go on, right? It makes it the most popular of all Jewish observances over the world. We have thousands of different ways of going about observing Passover, but Passover is the moment, right? And it's the moment that gives us a certain sense of who we are. It has the laws of who we are in it, and it has the moment that we are welded together. You can even see it in a family seder. In a family seder, the Passover celebration, one second. You will see that children ask questions of adults and adults ask questions of children. Most of the time we just listen to the old guy go on and on, but not on the Passover. On Passover, everyone's included. And in case you didn't do it right, you didn't hear the questions correctly, we even eat the questions. We eat bitter herbs to know about slavery is bitter, so we don't impose it on anybody else. We eat a big chunk of bitterness to remember that the Israelite child sons were thrown into the Nile. We eat matzah till we know it's poor, and we also eat matzah so we know that we're free. We drink a lot of wine so we can imagine ourselves, because drinking a lot of wine is always good. We can imagine ourselves back in Egypt, so it's as if we went out of Egypt ourselves. Rosenzweig thinks of this as the creation of who we are. The next thing he says is Shavuot. If you look at Shavuot, it's around 8 o'clock. He'll say Shavuot is the holiday of revelation. And you count 7 weeks. If you look in the second circle, you count 7 weeks, called the Omer, 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. In some ways, this is also a love story. Passover is the engagement with God that we go through. This is the narrative. So the creation is also the creation of our relationship. And the 7 weeks of the Omer is like, if you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, a bride will go around the groom 7 times. This is also what the Omer is. It's the 7 weeks. In each of those weeks, we try and see a different kind of sense of personality. Shavuot is actually when we stand at Mount Sinai and we receive the Torah. If you've ever gone to a Jewish wedding, you'll know that we have a marriage contract called the ketubah. And the marriage contract, the ketubah, is in some ways the legal arrangement, but it's also a love arrangement between the bride and the groom. And so Shavuot, according to Rosenzweig, is the moment in which God and the Jewish people become part of a relationship. So the first holiday, Passover, is the holiday of creation, and the second holiday, Passover, Shavuot, is the holiday of revelation. Then if you look at, for the end of this short narrative, then I'll do the narrative again, go to all the way to around 2 o'clock, or 1 o'clock, 12:30, and you'll see the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is, if you've ever seen it, we live in these little booths, and we recall our passage from Egypt to freedom in the state of Israel. The interesting thing is that you would think that the holiday would be about coming to Israel, but it's not. It's only about going towards Israel, because this is the holiday of redemption. This is the holiday in which we will finally go home. We will finally be safe. We will finally be free, and we'll finally be able to create a society which is more like the Garden of Eden than the one that we have been living in. Rosenzweig sees those 3 holidays, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as creation, revelation, redemption. He sees it everywhere. And Rosenzweig thinks of these holidays as the antidote to the malaise of the over-reasoned society that he lived in the 20th century. And I feel that also. I feel that these holidays are part of the consciousness that a person has, a Jew has, and maybe human beings have, that they feel that the creation that they were part of was beyond themselves. They have a responsibility back to it, that there's a certain demand in them, that Shavuot is a holiday that there really is truth, that we can really confront God and encounter, that the Torah, and that Sukkot is the movement of the world back towards redemption. But this narrative was inadequate. I'm going to retell the narrative now. I'm mindful of the time, but how am I doing, Scott? Okay. 1 second more. Here's the narrative the way I see it. Passover, I think, is in our lives the engagement with God, but not the sense that we are God. That we really have this relationship which is about love. That's why at the bottom of the thing I put love is. Love is as. And then we go through the 7 weeks, which is like the bride around the groom, until we get to Shavuot, where we get to be revealed. We might get Passover. The beginning of our relationship has certain rules to it, but there's got to be a moment of timelessness, a moment of eternity, a moment in which love is really the great object. And so I believe on Shavuot, which is around 8 o'clock in this chart, is the moment of love. But then at the end of Shavuot, Moses goes up the mountain because he's going to be alone with God. If you know, at a Jewish wedding, the bride and groom right after the wedding get to be alone for about 10 or 14 minutes. And it's called Yichud, and Moses is going to have Yichud with God. He's going to come down. But while Moses is up there, we get scared. We get scared because we're out of sync. And so we build the golden calf. I put a little drawing of a golden calf right on the left-hand side of the chart. And that is in some ways the great infidelity. And that infidelity lasts for the 40 days. So on the fast of the 17th of Tammuz at around 9:15, 9:30, Moses comes down with the tablets from God and he crashes them. And that's the day that even till today we fast. The 17th of Tammuz is the holiday in which we move out of the love cycle and into the death cycle. All great religions have both love and death in them. We all know this Easter week, from Good Friday to Easter, is a moment of both death and also the resurrection into love. In Judaism, it's the opposite. First, we go from law until love, and then love, we go into the cycle of death. So for the next 3 weeks, we feel this great cycle. But then on the 9th of Av, we feel the bottom, and we recollect that the temple was destroyed, and we fast again, a full fast, 25 hours. But then in the late summer, there's a month called Elul, now like at 11 o'clock on the circle. That month, which has an interesting name, Elul, E-L-U-L. You can see it in Hebrew, Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li. It comes out as an acronym for I am my beloved is mine. On that moment, we think that God comes back and says to Moses, the most amazing thing, let's try again. Let's try again. It didn't work the first time. Passover delivered you, but you didn't really believe. You got the Torah and Shavuot, but you didn't really understand it. But I want to try again. And so for those 30 days, we blow the shofar every morning to keep us awake. And sometimes people say, I once woke up my daughter and I asked her, are you awake? And she said, I am awake, but I want to be more awake. And I said, me too. So there we are. On Rosh Hashanah, you can see Rosh Hashanah around just after noon. We celebrate the beginning of a new year. We're trying again. Moses is still up on the mountain. 10 days later is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we say, we're sorry that the first time Moses came down, we built the golden calf. This time when Moses is coming down, right, 40 days from the beginning of Elul to Yom Kippur, these 40 days, we would rather die than build the golden calf. We are willing to die, and therefore I wrote there, strong as death. It's a line from the Song of Songs, the erotic love poem in the Bible. Love is as strong as death. Ava. Kemovet. So we understand our calendar, the narrative, as between love and death. And between love and death, this is when the revelation comes. This is when we try and fashion a new society. By the end of Yom Kippur, we are already at Sukkot. We're at 7 days again. We go outside and we go under a kind of a canopy building, and we go once again into the relationship with God. That first cycle is actually a love cycle. It's a love cycle that doesn't work always, but that we always have hope that we can renew it. Okay. If you look on this calendar, there are also 3 more holidays that are the second cycle. So the first cycle, I think, is really creation, revelation, redemption. The second cycle are the 3 rabbinic holidays, which are Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av. And I put down the great moment. I can certainly send the map with my little scheme on it, but take a screenshot. The first one is Hanukkah, and I sum it up in the old Jewish way of holidays. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. That's what we really believe, because we always interlace eating with holidays. Purim, and that holiday, the narrative is you can live in the land of Israel, but you have to live in the land of Israel in the appropriate way. If you try and live like a Greek in the land of Israel, you won't survive. Here's Purim at the bottom, right? Purim is a holiday in which an adversary in Persia in the year around 537 tries to come and kill all of us. Maybe it's a fantasy. We're saved by Queen Esther, and then we all have a big party and we get drunk. So I wrote, they tried to kill us, she won, let's drink. And then the third one is Tisha B'Av, they won, they tried to kill us, they won, let's not eat. That's why it's a fast day. And that's the third narrative. All right, I have 8 more minutes. So I'm going to come in for landing, and I'm going to move towards Heschel. If you look on this chart at the left-hand side, you'll see that there's one more cycle. These are the new holidays, right? Not they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. But Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, which is tonight, they really tried to kill us. And they tried to kill us so much that we lost all consciousness. We lost all ability to understand the world around us. We lost 6 million, more than half the Jews in the world. 1.5 million children, among many other millions of people in the world. We were helped by many people, but we were abandoned by most. And so how do you do that now? So the Jewish community, particularly the Israeli government, put in 3 new holidays. Yom HaShoah, they really tried to kill us. Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day in Israel, which is a week from tonight, which in the message of the Memorial Day, they did it 8 days, like the 8 days of Passover. The Memorial Day message is, we fought back. We had never fought back before. We had practiced powerlessness for most of Jewish history. But on Yom ZiCharon, they changed the narrative and they said, no more will Jews just go to the gas chamber. We're going to fight back. They even changed the Holocaust Memorial Day to the commemoration of martyrs and fighters, because they want to put fighting into the Jewish community. They said, no longer will we be able to be lined up and sent to the gas chamber. And then Yom HaSpa'ut is Israeli Independence Day. We're home. It's the end of the Sukkot. Sukkot is the redemptive holiday, the holiday on the way home, but Yom HaSpa'ut is the day in which we say we're home. So if you want to say the 3 holidays, that 3 cycles that we have, you say creation, revelation, redemption is the biblical one. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat is the rabbinic one. And they really killed us, we fought back, and now we're home as the 3rd cycle. Heschel, let's have the next slide, we'll see a picture of Heschel. There he is. This is kind of in the last year of his life. I think he was quite conscious of the way that he looked, but he did look like a prophet. And his first book that he wrote was called The Prophets. And so he was quite amazing. He was born, I should say, in 1907 in Warsaw. He was part of the Hasidic world. And both sides, he came from the Hasidic world. He was a mystic from the time he was born, really. And he believed that every step taken on the way was an answer to a prayer. And every stone was the memory of a marvel. He was amazing in that way. When he was 15, he went to the gymnasium in Vilna, so in Lithuania, where he didn't study mystical traditions, but he studied much more rational traditions. When he was 20, he went to the University of Berlin, where he wrote on the prophets, and he also went to the Academy for Jewish Research, the Hochschule der Wissenschaft des Judentum, and so he kind of got all the different sides. Sad to say, in 1933, he was woken up, and he began to see that the end of German Judaism was on the doorstep. And by 1938, on October 28th, in fact, of 1938, two members of the German police came to his house. They deported him. He lived for a while in a displaced persons camp. He finally came in 1939, about 6 weeks before the gates were closed, to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. And finally, he went to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and where he was a professor of mysticism and also philosophy, but really what he wanted to do was be a Jewish philosopher. So what was his philosophy? I just want to say of that for just a couple of minutes, because he's very important in the next cycle, in the new narrative. Because what I want to say is that after Yom HaShoah, these narratives actually, that we need them, but they don't quite work. What Heschel said is that humanity are beings in time. Most animals, we don't think that they have much sense of time. They know when they're hungry, they know when they're afraid, they know things, but they don't have past memories of the past or hope in the future. Human beings have that, and Judaism is particularly a religion of time. Shabbat is a cathedral in time, according to Heschel. It's a palace in time. And Heschel feels that there's, like Rosenzweig, that there's something more than the rational. Even at its best, it needs to be elicited, something spiritual. He says we have to be pulled out of our zones of comfort. We have to be awake, even more awake. We need a sense of wonder, a sense of unmitigated and innate surprise. The most important there is the word innate, a sense of unmitigated and innate surprise. You have to go through the world saying that I, as a human being, not now, if not now, when? It's got to be now. I should be surprised all the time. I should have a certain sense of amazement about the world, and that poetry will restore this innate surprise and even a sense of transcendence. If we only care about ourselves, then we're really not people. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, who am I? I have to be for other people. I did not create myself. I did not create my world, and I did not create my mission. That came out of an encounter with God. And God is seeking us, hoping for us, wondering for us, praying for us. And Heschel really assumes that we get this. He assumes that at the bottom, everyone has an attachment to God if we dig for it. I don't know if he really believed that, but he really pushed it hard. It's probably a rhetorical device. But in my one encounter with him, even I felt some sense of the presence of God in that elevator long ago. The reason Heschel thinks is that we feel trapped in this modern world of godliness, and that we have to restore a sense of humanity and God. Not that God is a function of ourselves, not a ground of being, not an impersonal being, but a being that infuses the whole world with wonder. And we have to find out our mission. How can we be useful? If we did not create the world, how can we treat the world that the gift that it was? How can we serve? Serving is the most important thing. Self-transcendent, this is his word, is based on caring about others more than myself. It's not I should love my neighbor as myself. It should be that I love my neighbor a little more than myself. It used to be enough to be as myself. But in the modern world where everything is so technical and so bereft of God, we have to know that we're not the center of the universe, that God is the center of the universe. And that happiness is based on the self-forgetfulness. We have to forget about our own needs and how we use things for ourselves, and we have to respond to God. And we have to be transcendent of who we are. And the image of God goes beyond us. It has to actually go beyond just the idea that they really tried to kill us. We fought back, and now we're home. We have to actually work on a new narrative. And that new narrative, I think, is the narrative that Jews have to put some kind of sense of holidays, that the whole world has to be our home. We can't just locate ourselves in one place. We have to locate ourselves in the world, and we have to rebuild the relationship. First, the image of God, and then the relationship with God. Heschel was famous for saying that the Bible is an answer to questions that nobody asks anymore. What is wonder? What is fear? What is reverence? What is humanity? What is the image of God? If I really see everyone in the image of God, how will that affect my life? And how will it affect my relationship with your life? We need to do that. I think that Rabbi Bob works hard on Jewish-Christian relations. I think we need a new narrative, a narrative that doesn't end in Yom Ha'atzmaut, in Independence Day for Israel. As important, as delightful, and maybe as transformative as that was, we need holidays that collect everybody together. We need holidays that we really look at each other, and we're working on this sense that there's a day of delight. You know, Heschel says about Yom Kippur that he was tremendously disturbed in the hours before Yom Kippur. He really felt the power of the holiday. He understood that God was looking at him, and he tried to respond. But on Yom Kippur itself, the Day of Atonement, he felt God had forgiven him, and now it set him forward to go and do things. He says, you know, why we fast on Yom Kippur? Who needs to eat on a day in which we can feel the love and the cleanliness of our relationship with God? This is a very important sense of the new narrative. It tells us who we are. Just as in Thanksgiving, we're grateful, and on Independence Day, we can feel democratic and free. We, the Jews, and everybody else needs a way of putting this Holocaust, this destructive century that we just got through, into a new sense of where we can really open up our eyes and see each other, that we can really experience each other, that we're not just so self-reflective like Maimonides thought God was, but that we really see each other and we see the image of God on the face of the other. This is a great challenge, and I look forward to doing it with you all, and I thank you for your attention.
This is wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi Michael. And I'm inviting you to write down some questions or comments. There are a couple that I know someone has asked about a new Exodus tradition. And that certainly is something that we need to sort out. What does that mean? How to raise that question?
What is the new Exodus tradition? What does it mean?
And there's a question, thank you. Do you propose a fourth cycle or a rethinking of past cycles?
I don't propose a rethinking of past cycles. I think that they are part of our memory. I think it was unbelievably courageous to even do the third cycle. I mean, no new holidays. We didn't maybe think about doing it. If you put up the calendar again for a second, there was a day in the middle of the winter when the temple was first attacked by the Babylonians in 586. No, the one just before that? That one. If you look at around 3 o'clock, it says the fast of the 10th of Tevet, 586 BCE. So that's a traditional day of disaster for Jews. So they wanted to make Holocaust Day on that day. But they said, no, we need a new day. And so they commemorated the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which began on April 19th. That day was during Passover, so they didn't want to put it during Passover. They put it a week later, but they elevated it. I think we need a fourth cycle. I really do. I feel that, and I don't think that we can do a fourth cycle that's just one that we develop ourselves, right? It's too parochial. It won't lead us to the goal, which is both learning from other people's and teaching other people's. Rosenzweig, in my view, was right. He said, it's not necessary for me to become a Christian because Judaism is sufficient, just like Christianity is sufficient, that Islam is sufficient. Scott knows of my great love of Islam. Islam is a sufficient religion. Hinduism, Buddhism, all the great traditions, and even the minor traditions, Sikhism, we should learn about them, and we should actually put together some sense of a fourth cycle so that there's a narrative challenge for us. And I have an idea about that. If you think about the first cycle, it says creation, revelation, and then redemption. But it won't happen. It won't happen. It hasn't happened. We didn't get to redemption. Here we are in 2021. We're still not at redemption. So there's got to be another stage. I live in Budapest. Why? In Budapest, there are about 120,000 Jews. In 1980, none of those Jews knew that they were Jews. No one would tell their kids that you're Jewish under the communists because they might say to somebody else, they might spill the beans. And so what happened was that people lied to their children and said, "You're nothing. You're a communist." But in the 1990s and in the 2000s, all of a sudden there was a reawakening. And that moment of reawakening was incredibly important. And it kind of broke the yoke of the communist silence and silencing, and it gave people a voice again. I think we need a holiday of reawakening. And I think the holiday of reawakening has to come before the holiday of redemption. Rosenzweig had a lot of hope, creation, revelation, redemption, but he died in 1929 of ALS, with lateral sclerosis of the vulva. And so he never saw the Holocaust. He might have seen it coming, but he didn't see it. Heschel saw it. What Heschel decided to do, remarkably, was not write about the Holocaust, but challenge us to become better human beings so that we never have a Holocaust again. He called it the new piety. He said the new piety is to write about a religious personality and more ideals so that you can reawaken yourself, and you would never dream of doing those kind of things. I think a holiday of reawakening is a crucial thing. We've had a hard century. The 19th century was extremely ambitious and optimistic. The 20th century is bloody. And in the 21st century, we need a re-enchantment. We need a certain sense of bringing the sacred back, and we need a reawakening. I think that's the work that Rabbi Bob and Scott and I do. We try and bring an enchantment even to the university. Lord knows they're not always open to it.
So as we get ready to close, because we're getting close to 5, and I know a lot of people have got to run to other things, including you, Michael, I often ask this question of a lot of different people. And I talk about that interview that Heschel had at the end of his life.
Yeah.
And at the end of his life, that great interview, do you have a word for young people? What is that word for our young students here who maybe don't have a narrative?
Well,
they don't understand it. They don't even know what the narrative is.
His answer on that moment, which is such a wonderful way to close, if you want to close, he said, I know the world is absurd. I grew up in Warsaw in a Hasidic dynasty, and here I am in New York, in completely out of place, and the world has changed so much. But he said, but beyond the absurdity, beyond the paradoxes, you should live your life as if it was a work of art. And I think that almost brings me a little to tears, to live your life as if it was a work of art. I was once when I was at Dartmouth, someone came in and said, how come the Jews never contributed anything to civilization and culture? I said, quite a big statement. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, I'm taking an art class. There's no cathedrals that we built. There's no great paintings that we painted. I said, we have time. We sculpted time. We sculpted meaning. And we tried to make our lives as if it was a work of art. And I don't know if he succeeded at that, but I think that's the challenge. I think your students at Elmhurst and all of us, we have to try and sculpt our lives as if it was a work of art, that it really matters. If everything is just nature, then nothing really matters. It's just going to happen the way it's always happened. And if everything is God, then we can't really change anything. We're only working inside the inner mind of God. But if we had a relationship with each other, that relationships, whether it's with your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or your partner, or your mate, or your class, or your community, or your nation, or your world, then we can make our lives as if it was a work of art. That's a pretty strong remark.
On that note, will you all join me in thanking Rabbi Michael Paley for an amazing, wonderful time? I have put my email out there, so you all email me about questions, comments. Hope you'll join us. This evening was taped, so you can go back and reimagine and re-listen to Rabbi Paley. Sunday night at 7 o'clock, we're Zooming out again for the Yom HaShoah service and then the annual lecture for the Holocaust. Dr. Stephen Ray from Chicago Theological Seminary will be our speaker. I need you to help us craft these things to help Spiritual Life Council build that interfaith relationship and work, to help all of us start to sort through the questions of purpose and meaning and the absurdity. God knows there's a lot of absurdity. For all of us, Michael, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. Blessings and strength and prayers to all of you, but especially as you, Rabbi Michael Paley, go back to your home. with your wonderful family.
Thank you so
Grace
much.
to all. Blessings.
Thank you.